Okay, then I think I'll get us started. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Freedom to Belong, a conversation on citizenship and the path to healing with the Center for Victims of Torture and United Stateless. My name is Shelby, and I'm the Events and Marketing Officer at the Center for Victims of Torture, or simply CVT. And it's my absolute pleasure to be the very first to welcome you all here today. To start us off, I want to provide a quick overview of what you can expect from our time together. We'll hear opening remarks from our moderator, followed by individual presentations from both CVT and United Stateless. And then our speakers will come together for a moderated conversation on the intersection between statelessness and trauma healing. We'll save some time at the end of the webinar to answer some of your questions. So please, as thoughts come to you throughout the event, feel free to drop those in the chat or use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Today's conversation is being recorded, and I will be sharing that recording along with additional resources in a follow-up email after the event today. Before I turn things over to our speakers, it is my genuine pleasure to introduce the three amazing women who we'll be hearing from today. Our moderator is Martine Kalaw. Martine is a speaker, author, and stateless survivor whose memoir, Illegal Among Us, chronicles her journey from statelessness and undocumented status to U.S. citizenship. She is a global ambassador for United Stateless, and she curates and facilitates conversations on statelessness for a global audience, ensuring stateless voices are heard on the world stage. And we are so very grateful to have her leading our conversation today. We have Karina Ambartsoumian-Clough. She is the executive director of United Stateless, and she has spent more than 3 decades living as a stateless person in the US and has transformed that experience into a national platform for advocacy and change. Karina is a speaker, a writer, and a community organizer, and has worked to elevate stateless voices and advance solutions for stateless people in the United States and globally. And last but most certainly not least, we have Leora Hudak, who is the program manager for migration partnerships at CVT. She oversees mental health and psychosocial support programming at the US-Mexico border and Latin America, and she leads CVT's work on statelessness and trauma-informed care. Please join me in the chat in welcoming Martine, Karina, and Leora. With that, I'm going to hand things over to Martine for our conversation. Martine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shelby. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Before we start today, I want to try something with you. It's an opportunity to not just think about statelessness, but to imagine it. So if you will, please close your eyes if that helps. Imagine that it's tomorrow morning. You wake up and you go to grab your license, and it doesn't work anymore. Not suspended, it's not valid. Almost like it was never real. You can't get a new one. Your job asks you to re-verify that you're allowed to work, but you can't. The piece of paper that made you real to every system that you rely on, your bank, your doctor, your landlord, the police, it stopped being enough. Overnight, it seems. You didn't move. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped being legible to the world. And there's no line to get back into. There's no form, no appeal, just outside of every system built to let a person function indefinitely. That's Thursday morning for over 200,000 people in this country. Some of them have been living this reality, this Thursday, for 20 years, 30 years, and even 40 years. As America turns 250 years old this year, the whole country is asking the same question. Who belongs here? Who counts? Today, we're looking at that question through the people who get asked to prove that they exist, but they can't. You might be thinking, I already have a lot of causes. Where does this fit in? That's a valid question. And here's the honest answer. You don't have to go far to find statelessness. It's probably a few miles from where you're even sitting, and it's usually invisible, hiding at the intersection of a lot of causes that we already care about. Someone can't get health care, they can't hold a job, they can't find housing. Sometimes statelessness is at the foundation, is the reason why for those things. Today isn't meant to be a lecture. It's really meant to be a conversation with people who live this work every day, one from lived experience, one from the mental health side of things. I'm one of them. My name is Martine Kalaw, as Shelby said earlier. I'm a stateless survivor myself. My memoir, Illegal Among Us, is really about growing up undocumented and stateless before eventually becoming a US citizen. So this isn't theoretical to me. And by the end of this conversation, I hope that it's not theoretical for you also. Now, I would like to stop talking and turn the floor over to Karina, who is not only someone I greatly admire, but someone I consider a friend. In the 8 years that I've known Karina, I have watched her use her smart, her brilliance, her compassion, and her voice to advocate for others and to create infrastructure to elevate our community, all the while navigating her own battles. She and I can go from, I like to joke and say that she and I can go from talking about the most complex policies related to immigration to 1 minute, and then the next minute we'll switch it up and we'll exchange our favorite reality TV shows, right? So without further ado, I'd like to turn the table over to Karina. Karina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martine. That is quite, I'm humbled by your praise. Thank you. I would like to first establish a shared understanding of what statelessness is. A stateless person is a person who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. This definition comes from the 1954 Convention relating to the status of stateless persons, an international agreement that established a legal definition of statelessness. And definitions matter. Statelessness isn't a choice. It's created by laws and policies that deny people a nationality. And when we use stateless to mean anything else, we risk making invisible the very people this term was created to describe and to protect. The United States is actually one of the strongest examples in the entire world of preventing statelessness. Through the 14th Amendment, we recognize birthright citizenship, or the Latin term jus soli. Just a few weeks ago, this past summer, the Supreme Court reaffirmed that promise in Barber v. Trump. And it's really important to note that had birthright citizenship been eliminated, it would have created a real risk of statelessness for children born in this country. But statelessness happens here, and it oftentimes thought about something that happens somewhere else, but it doesn't. There's an estimate of 218,000 people in the United States who are stateless and at risk of statelessness. And they come from over 30 different countries and territories around the world and every corner of our immigration system. Yet the United States still has no permanent framework to recognize and protect them. People who are already stateless living here, even though international law has suggestions and protections that countries can implement. And nationality is more than just a passport, right? It is your legal identity. It's the relationship between you and your government that says you belong here. And together, we have a responsibility to our Constitution. It shapes your rights, but also your identity, your community, and your sense of belonging. I mean, this past summer felt like FIFA summer. I noticed everywhere, everyone felt pride in their countries that were playing. And it's also relevant to celebrating the 250th anniversary of this country because nationalism and belonging can be positive. And this is Henry. Henry is our member. He is a Holocaust survivor. He also lived through a time when being gay was criminalized in the United States. Yet despite everything he survived, he spent decades without nationality. Through United Stateless and our legal partners, Henry became a US citizen and voted for the very first time at the age of 84. It never is too late to restore dignity and belonging, but it can last a lifetime. And this is Abigail. According to the US Constitution, Abigail is an American citizen. But because her birth was never registered, she grew up unable to prove who she was. Her story reminds us that legal identity begins with birth registration, where there is no barriers, there is no fees, there is no hardships on new parents to register their child's birth, to establish that connection between that child and the government. And even Americans can fall through those cracks. And this is Diana. Diana was born stateless in Greece because her parents are Albanian and Greece does not have birthright citizenship. And she came to the United States as a child. She graduated high school as a valedictorian. She received a full scholarship to Harvard, and she is now a rising third-year law student at Tulane Law School. She did everything right and beyond, but delays in renewing her employment authorization cost her nearly her dream job. And it wasn't a failure of talent, it was a failure of a system that doesn't recognize stateless people and doesn't operate with stateless people in mind. And these are only 3 stories from our community and our legal clinic. Citizens of Nowhere, our award-winning film, shares many more stories of foreign-born stateless people living in the United States, including my own. We'll learn that telling your story isn't just advocacy. It is also healing, awareness raising, community building. And that's why our partnership with Center for Victims of Torture feels so natural. We are free to live, but not to exist. One of our community members said this during our community call several years ago, and I've just never forgotten it, because this is exactly what statelessness feels like. Our systems are not designed for people without a nationality, people that cannot respond directly to what country are you a citizen of. We often think of statelessness as a legal issue, and it is, but it's also a mental health issue. It's an identity issue. It's a family issue, a belonging issue. When people spend years or decades without recognition, uncertainty becomes chronic. It affects relationships, physical health, employment, housing, education, hope. This is why legal services aren't enough. Justice and healing have to go hand in hand. If statelessness is about exclusion, then our work at United Stateless creates belonging. United Stateless was founded by stateless people because we knew no one should have to navigate this journey alone. Our mission is simple: to ensure that every stateless person in the United States has the support they need while working towards permanent solutions for tomorrow, for ourselves and for each other. Through legal services, advocacy, community, and mental health support, we help people rebuild not only their legal status, but their sense of identity, dignity, and hope. We are the only organization in the United States solely focused on statelessness, one of the few impact-led stateless organizations in the world. And I'm very proud to share that we're also one of the only stateless organizations that has an in-house legal clinic. And that's why our partnership with Center for Victims of Torture feels so natural. I would like to turn it over to Leora.
Thank you so much, Karina. And even though those are stories that I have heard before, it still made me feel emotional to hear them shared here in this platform with a group of people who I know is here to listen and here to care for these stateless individuals. Hi, everyone. I'm Leora Hudak, and I'm the Migration Partnerships Program Manager at the Center for Victims of Torture. For those who are coming to this webinar today who are new to CVT, our organization works globally to end the use of torture worldwide and to support individuals, families, and communities in healing from torture through rehabilitative services and advocacy. It has been an absolute pleasure to partner with United Stateless and work on issues related to statelessness since 2020. Our partnership started through a small collaboration with UNHCR to bring resilience support to United Stateless members, so stateless individuals who were founders of United Stateless as an organization, and to allies and supporters of the organization. Since that partnership began, things have changed over time, and the growth has been very iterative and very natural towards the types of things that are needed for the stateless community. As you probably have seen now from meeting Martine and Karina and hearing the stories of Henry, Abigail, and Diana, the members of this community are bright, creative, and capable of identifying the solutions to statelessness if they're given the platform to do so. So, from a CVT's perspective, our goal is this that stateless persons are strong, well, and empowered enough to advocate on their own behalf. But what we realize at CVT is that doing so means confronting trauma and loss every day in that advocacy work. So, coming forward and sharing one's story, talking about one's experience of statelessness, participating in different meetings, legislative sessions, going to Washington, D.C. for the day of the birthright citizenship hearing, all this requires confronting one's trauma on a daily basis. And so it's absolutely essential that mental health and resilience support is an integrated component of USL's work because stateless people should be the ones who are identifying the solutions to this problem. How this has looked over the years is that CVT has led a community call, which is a monthly space where the stateless community comes together to build community as a pillar of the work and deepen engagement with statelessness issues. While we love our participation in the community call is it will never be fully stateless as long as CVT facilitators are present. So it's become a goal of ours to also train community facilitators to take over the leadership of the community call and be able to provide a peer support model. So that looks like, CVT facilitators and CVT mental health providers directly supporting members of the community in becoming owners of these stateless-led spaces and having the tools and skills to provide emotional support. But we also recognize that for some community members, a little bit more support is needed that goes beyond community and peer-led spaces. So through our partnership with United Stateless over the years, we have also conducted a training in partnership with United Stateless for mental health service providers all over the country on best practices working with stateless clients. Statelessness is a unique form of trauma, and I'm going to show you a little image to represent that on the screen. It's a complex form of trauma. So there's lots of different facets to statelessness. Statelessness often means ambiguous losses, such as a loss of a sense of who am I, a loss of a sense of belonging. One thing I've noticed in this country and culture here in the United States is that we're often asked, who are you and where are you from? And the way that we answer that question is based on our heritage. Where did our grandparents come from? Where did our ancestors come from? And how does that shape who we are? That type of question is difficult for a stateless person to answer because there is no country that claims them. Statelessness also means that there's an inability to go home and an inability to see family because there isn't a travel document. So the types of trauma that can create are not being able to participate in family events, not being able to be there for a funeral when there's the passing of a family member. It can also mean that it's hard to plan. There's a loss of time, a loss of hope for the future. Oftentimes, a stateless person will say, I can't have a 5-year plan because what does that mean to me? I don't know what will happen in 5 years. I don't know what my status will be. But what we've also seen through our partnership with USL and working deeply with members of the stateless community is that advocacy and community give that sense of purpose, belonging, and sometimes even family. Resilient communities are stronger than any resilient individual. And so oftentimes when a new stateless member comes to us, feeling that sense of who am I? I've been in hiding, I've been lost all of this time, and I'm feeling that sense of family and purpose for the first time when I meet the rest of this community. You might be wondering, why statelessness at CVT? Why is this an issue that's important for the Center for Victims of Torture, whose mission is to end torture worldwide? Statelessness is important to us for several reasons. First, being stateless or having a lack of citizenship can lead to greater vulnerability of experiencing other human rights abuses, such as torture and cruel and inhumane treatment. So when there's no country to be accountable to somebody, it means that more things can happen without a system of justice and accountability for those individuals or community members. Statelessness intersects already with our work in many places in the world. You've heard the example of this project and this collaboration today, but statelessness is also an issue where we work in Iraq, in Uganda, and with a project we had with Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, for example, the current president, Daniel Ortega, is systematically denationalizing human rights defenders in exile as a further form of punishment. And this is something that we see in authoritarian contexts. So statelessness becomes a form of those human rights abuses and a form of additional punishment for pro-democracy work. Access to citizenship is also often a healing goal of many people. So if we have mothers whose children were born stateless, they often tell us that it's a goal of theirs to find nationality rights for their children, and that will give them a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning and a sense of healing. And access to citizenship increases access to healing services. Without nationality, it's difficult to have documentation, to access healthcare services, medical insurance, many social service systems. It's difficult to even have the proper identification and paperwork to pick your own child up from school. So being able to access nationality also means it facilitates the work of CVT because it means that people can access their healing rights as well. The quote you see on the side of the screen here comes from one stateless member when they describe their experience of being stateless. It feels like I'm a ship in the middle of the night surrounded by water. But just being heard right now is everything. And so that sense of connection and belonging that comes from this community is hugely significant. I'm going to finish with a quote before I hand it back to Martine to facilitate our conversation today. A couple of years ago, we surveyed the stateless community and asked them, what are you getting from this? What does it mean to you to come together? What do you need? And one member told us that the United Stateless community is a family away from our nuclear family. This is the depth of the meaning of bringing people together for hope, healing, connection, and from that basis of hope, healing, connection, to participate in advocacy, justice, and ultimately change those systems that Karina described. This has been one of the most influential and important projects I have worked on in my 12 plus years at CVT, and it is my pleasure to showcase it here today. So I'm going to hand it back to Martine to facilitate our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina and Leora, for offering us a lens into statelessness and allowing us to understand statelessness from a policy, clinical perspective, and recounting some personal firsthand stories. We really appreciate you. And I think there's still a few areas that I'd like for us to uncover together, and address the questions that I'm seeing that the audience members are asking. So let's take a deeper dive into introspective on statelessness. Karina, actually, I saw this question in the chat, so I'm going to we can start to answer it a little bit, and starting with you. With everything in the news about immigration, it's fair to ask, how is statelessness different from being undocumented or being a refugee? They all kind of start to sound the same to the average person who's watching the news. So, if you can start naming what statelessness actually is and how it's distinct from immigration, being undocumented or being a refugee, or how it's similar.
Yeah, that is such a good question. Statelessness equates to not having a travel document or passport. There is no embassy you can go to. There is no, oftentimes a stateless person doesn't even have a birth certificate because they were born without the recognition of a country, while others like me are born in a country that doesn't exist anymore. So my Soviet birth certificate is absolutely a relic of a time that doesn't exist. And the difference between a stateless person and other immigrant statuses is that there's not only a country you can return to, but you can't deport yourself. We have members in our community that want to return to their home country or the territory that replaced their birth country, and they can't. They can't live here and adjust because there is no stateless protection in our immigration system, but they also can't leave and live elsewhere. And they're stuck in this limbo for decades. And to answer Lilith's question, we can only speak about stateless people and their interaction with the US immigration system. And what we're advocating for, permanent durable solution, is for the United States government to pass legislation that would create a stateless status, that would allow for stateless people to go apply for stateless status, to then become a lawful permanent resident or a green card holder, to then one day be eligible to naturalize. We want the system to include statelessness, and we're fighting for inclusion.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you for answering Lilith's question. And one of the things that stands out to me is what you just said. Like for stateless individuals, your home country becomes a relic. Like that's really, really profound to see it and think of it that way. I actually never even had the words to put together to think of it that way, but it absolutely is true. And as you're talking about some of the policies, let's get into the policy question, both for, Karina and Leora. So, with all the current policies unfolding in the US that are impacting stateless individuals, if you can talk about what those are, and in your discussion, if you can tell us a little bit more about birthright citizenship. I know both of you alluded to it in your introductions to some extent, but if you can, expand on birthright citizenship and the current policies that are impacting statelessness.
I'll be happy to start this out. The world has 190 some countries and territories, and every one of those has their own laws around how does someone become a citizen? How do we recognize? How do we recognize if our citizen is living abroad and they decide to have a child abroad? How, like all those nitty-gritty ways that people, nationals move around and leave. And less than half, a quarter of countries around the world have birthright citizenship. And the United States, I mentioned in my presentation, is a pillar on that because not only do we have birthright citizenship, but you're born in a home or a birthing center, you automatically receive your registration, your birth certificate. There's no questions asked. There's no need to travel to a city. There's no need to pay a fee. You get it. And that's profound. In the previous administrations, presidential administrations, the United States played a role in supporting countries around the world to ensure ending birthrights or protecting children and birth registrations and shifting towards birthright citizenship and anywhere that there are policies to address statelessness. That's important. We hope that it comes back to that. But when it comes to birthright citizenship, it's so important to describe it as the American promise. I had a slide earlier that talked about why we have it and how it got here. Not only, the survivors of slavery and their descendants pushed for the 14th Amendment, but then Native American tribes pushed for their recognition. And we even had really important Supreme Court cases, one of them being Barbara v. Trump, to protect it. And we have to. If the United States government does away with birthright citizenship, it would absolutely create stateless people in this country, and it would even add more to the limbo and exploitation that stateless people endure. With this administration and its enforcement priorities, the biggest fear a stateless person has is to be taken into detention for the process of deportation. And like I mentioned earlier, because the system doesn't recognize stateless people get trapped in that. They are repeatedly taken into custody and then spent time living in detention for up to 6 to 8 months, hoping to have an answer, but fearing that they will be deported to a third country, a country that doesn't exist anymore, or a country that they faced persecution and atrocity crimes. It's quite dangerous. And just to give my example, I was born in the Soviet Union. I had a failed asylum claim. My asylum claim was denied 3 times, and I was placed under final removal order and deportation order for 19 years. It took a lot of self-advocacy, good legal advice, mental health support to navigate the system that doesn't recognize me, for me to have a chance to be able to seek protection. And so that's our response to how we navigate as an organization, is a response to our own needs, but also preemptively the needs of the community. So right now, our biggest concern is to ensure that stateless people know their rights, understand the recourse if they are taken into custody, have those conversations with loved ones and preparations in advance, and have an action plan. And that's our goal, is to empower, but also not to lie, to be honest. This is the times that we're living in, and how can we support you to face the reality?
Thank you, Karina. You said something earlier that was also equally profound. You said um, the work that USL and CVT does is to restore dignity. And that was so important, for me during my stateless journey. I felt like I had no dignity. I felt like I had no control over the future. I was terrified all the time. And so I want to get into that a little bit more. And Leora, please jump into this question here. What do the rollbacks of these protections mean for both of the populations that USL and CVT works with? If you can talk a little bit more about that and unpack that, please.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that we've noticed, through this partnership is in that the first few years that we were working together was such a focus on bringing community together to organize to advance rights, right? It was about making the Stateless Protection Act possible, expanding rights for stateless people, allowing people to come out into the world and share their story. And what changed in early 2025 with the change of administration, it really became a defensive territory, right? And so, how do stateless people know their rights, keep themselves protected, stay safe, protect their families, and prepare for what might happen? And that's a really different environment to work in. It's one where we're thinking a little bit more about safety and protection in a system where rights are being revoked on a daily basis from a situation that was pretty hopeful. And I think you said it well, like it creates this climate of fear, right? Like when I don't know these things, when I don't have, when my dignity is not being communicated to me from the outside through these systems, then it becomes really scary. And some of the things that we've seen from a mental health perspective have been, folks who are really going back underground. Maybe because I have the support of this community before, I was feeling okay to come forward and say, this is who I am and this is my status. And now that doesn't feel safe to do anymore. And there's that fear of prolonged detention, the fear of third country deportation. Some of these policies that, folks in the audience here today are hearing about in the news are going to indirectly or disproportionately impact stateless people, right? Because if there is no country that's willing to accept the deportation of an individual because they'll say this person is not a citizen of this country, how is it that will take them back for deportation? They're at higher risk of finding themselves in places where they have no connection, right? Which would just further that fear, that uncertainty means that the response is I have to keep myself safe. And I have to keep myself safe sometimes means that I might not leave the house, right? And when someone's isolated like that and living in fear, we get increasingly concerned about their well-being. I wanted to share a story too, because I think the other part of what's been changing over the last year has been policies that further empower immigration enforcement. And with the empowerment of immigration enforcement to make arrests, to have the funds to expand operations like what we saw in Minnesota, people are fearful of accessing their own rights. So even if you have a child who's born in the United States as somebody with an unstable status, and you know that that child is eligible for citizenship, you may be afraid to file that paperwork because will it have an impact on our family? Will we find ourselves separated? And that's one thing we've seen as well. A case comes to mind that we worked with at CVT that was a woman who presented at the border when the border was still open. And she didn't know she was pregnant. And the stress of going into border detention uh, sent her into a spontaneous labor, and she gave birth. in Border Patrol holding facilities. Border Patrol and Immigration refused to acknowledge that birth. She was transferred to the hospital, but the hospital didn't actually witness the birth, so they couldn't certify the birth, right? And so that mother suddenly, with all of the stress of what she was going through in her immigration case, with realizing she was pregnant, she was caring for a baby, also is being systematically blocked from accessing citizenship for her child. And fortunately, in that situation, she happened to be in the sector of the border, in the place where CVT worked, to see what was going on and to say, wait a second, that's a baby at risk of statelessness. If we can't get the paperwork and the acknowledgement of that birth, that baby will grow up stateless. And so we're not talking necessarily, I mean, there's so many stories of statelessness. It's one of my biggest takeaways of doing this work is as soon as you think you understand the issue, you hear a new story. But in this case, it's really important to understand that these are the young, the infants, the children, innocent people who are being impacted by these policies by a border patrol, by ICE officers who are empowered to make it difficult for people to access their rights. And all of those things have an intergenerational impact in terms of mental health and well-being.
Thank you, Leora. When you share that harrowing recount of this woman, giving birth at the border, and thinking about the rights she had, or her knowledge or lack of knowledge of the rights that she has. And you also mentioned how statelessness is ever changing, right? It's changing shape and color all of the time. We see, I mean, it's evident that the work that USL and CVT does collectively is so powerful and so needed. So can you talk a little bit more, both of you, about what this partnership between CVT and USL has meant to both organizations and what has been possible because of this partnership?
Well, I would like to preface by saying that, when we say that those directly impacted have the um, power and the rights to be in the room to create solutions, that is extremely important. And it reflects the history of social justice movements in this country. I think about the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement. I think about one that I draw a lot of inspiration from is the American Disabilities Act, the ADA. What went into that? It was people directly impacted, their loved ones, and stakeholders. And they advocated together in coordination through storytelling, through impact-led perspectives. There's this one, for me, it's very iconic, photo of the steps to the Congress, and as an act of civil disobedience, or rather, advocacy, parents of disabled children put their children on these steps to the I am blanking on here. There is an act to that those directly impacted have a role to play in this. And it does come with hardship, reliving the trauma. And to also answer, like, how do Lily's other question, how do enforcement policies create wounds? It creates PTSD, trauma. Oftentimes family separation is permanent with our community. It oftentimes, reliving detention, reliving being taken away from your family, reliving that can also cause a lot of harm and isolation. And I believe that we need to heal while we advocate for greater solutions. We need to be strong enough. We need to be united enough, a community enough. And CVT comes into play because we need to all embrace our diversity as a community. We are everything from race, gender, ethnicity, religion, political affiliation. We're everything, but we unite around our shared experience and our own desire to become citizens and move on with our lives. And that's a long game. And while we are fully building our movement, working with CVT, working with Leora and Amy to expand our mental health services, to expand what it means to be a community, to really to lead by those impacted. across the spectrum of the experiences that we hold.
Yeah,
Leora,
I couldn't agree more. I think it's been really powerful to participate in a program of CVT that kind of moves CVT from the center to the margins in a way that moves an organization like United Stateless to the center, and to have the voice. And that has been, I'm watching the way that that has unfolded, to find the ways to support community, to support individual community members, collectively support the stateless community. In speaking out on their own behalf and advocating for their rights is something that it's not just within this project, it's become a core tenet of how I think about and approach every aspect of my work at CVT in every program in every part of the world. And we've been asked, like by other stateless organizations globally, how have you done this? Tell us how you have been able to make this happen. And I think what I would say about that is that it has to come from a place of true commitment. To have impacted people a part of or leading movements towards rights does not just mean that we draft legislation and then we send it to a stateless person. Please look at this so we can put the impacted stamp of approval on it. It means that every step of the process is led by, consulted by, informed by the voices of people directly impacted. And that is something that is a core tenet of CVT's work in many different areas, including our justice and accountability work, our clinical services. But this has been the shining example, because it does work. And I can't tell you the amount of like pride and genuine joy I feel when I see members of this community representing statelessness at the global level. The global conference on statelessness happened in Malaysia last year, and members of this community presented. We were there to watch when Henry, whose story you heard today, received his citizenship and shared photos and words about that experience. When to join into a legislative call where members of the community were sharing their story as a part of efforts to advance the Stateless Protection Act, it is almost indescribable, the feeling of seeing that really happen in action and to know that it's really possible. And so this will continue to reverberate for me in all of the work that I do in these spaces. So it's been hugely impactful. Yeah.
thank you both so much for answering that question. And I'm seeing there's so many amazing questions that are coming from our audience members. So I'm going to try to weave them in as much as possible, but there will be ample time at the end for Q&A. Karina, you didn't choose this. You were a child when a country disappeared from under you. What do you want this audience to understand about how little control anyone has over becoming stateless? And to answer a question that was posed in the chat, I saw it a minute ago and I can't find it right now. If you can elaborate on the statistic of stateless persons in relation to women and children, or children specifically, because I know that there's a stat that we usually kind of, share and go by. But if you can share that stat and then answer the question of, your experience and what you want people to understand about how little control that many of us have in becoming stateless.
Thank you, Martine. There are 20 countries in the world where women do not have equal nationality rights as men. They're unable to pass their nationality to their children. Statelessness or governments that push for policies or change constitutions oftentimes do it to target a specific group of people based on gender, race, religion, sexual orientation. It doesn't, I mean, it shouldn't surprise us that countries cause this. Countries are responsible to ensure nationality so people are access to their human rights, to all the things that nationality offers you. And unfortunately, countries are also responsible for taking that away. Women and children are unfortunately susceptible to statelessness because of gender injustice, and this country is not far away from when gender created barriers to women equal to men, too. I mentioned in my slides the Cable Act. There was a time in this country where American citizen women were stripped of their nationality if they married foreign-born men. That didn't happen to US American men citizens, but it definitely affected women. And being someone, what I want the audience here to get to understand is that one, you should be proud Americans. You should be proud to be from a country that has an American promise, that has the best system in the world to prevent statelessness and activate belonging. That's important. And it definitely didn't come easy. It was a lot of convincing, a lot of impact-led work, a lot of trauma and atrocity crimes that led to us having this promise. But also that unfortunately, around the world, nationality and citizenship isn't something as direct as it is here. And it absolutely impacts the United States because of our presence as a global economic force. We are a Western power. We are, our culture and our decisions that happen internally affect the globe. And we are so interconnected. And with that being said, it's not necessarily easy for someone to migrate to the United States either. It's not like you can just show up at the border anymore. It does happen through a lot of trauma and grit to get here. And unfortunately, sometimes that journey does not end with people and with their arrival. It continues throughout their life. Statelessness doesn't just happen overnight. It carries on for decades. And we have members in our community that have been in the United States and stateless without any possibility for adjustment and protection until the United States government passes the Stateless Protection Act for 60, 70 years. Their only chance is for legislation reform. And we want to advocate, we want to push for one thing that we believe the United States is capable of, passing the Stateless Protection Act, protecting unregistered Americans, and ensuring birthright citizenship and birth registrations are effective and are law of the land.
Thank you so much, Karina. I'm looking at the time, and we want to make sure we have an opportunity for the audience to ask some more questions. So I want to close out by having both of you answer this question. What does it mean to be an American citizen, right? And you can answer it through a number of lenses. One might be, if you want to kind of dig into that question, is how might the average US citizen be impacted by statelessness, if at all? Or why should the average American US citizen care about this topic, right? How does it relate back to being an American citizen? So, Leora, if you want to start it off, and Karina, you can answer after Leora, please.
Yeah, it's a great question that I have been reflecting on quite a bit as we've been like moving through this summer with the Supreme Court case on birthright citizenship and thinking about like how to talk about my own experience with this issue with members of my own family, members of my own community, right? How to help them understand the impact of potential impact of this issue and why it's so important. And I think, many Americans who are American citizens who hold their citizenship might feel like, well, that's secure. And so, the Supreme Court case would affect potentially future people who come to the US or who are born in the US, but that won't affect me. And the reality is that I think an important way to think about this is that um, had this Supreme Court case been successful in overturning birthright citizenship, that further restricts and reduces the rights of all of us, right? The first chapter of that book is the end of birthright citizenship, but that would eventually would have changed is the definition of what it means to be an American and the scope of rights that come with that. And so you have to know that chapter 2 of the book is further restricting the rights of US citizens. And we're seeing that happen, right? We're seeing different ways that is the playbook. And so I think one message I would want to leave this group with is that the rights of some are the rights of all. And it is the work of all of us to advocate for the rights of everyone, especially with such a significant issue. Because when the precedent is set for those rights to start to roll back, that will begin to affect every person in this room. Right. And so what it means to be an American and a rights holder by virtue of that citizenship will change over time. And so it is absolutely our duty to care about this and to care about one another, even if it seems like this is an issue that's distant from me because I have my passport, I have my citizenship. So that's, I think, where I would start in thinking about how to understand it.
Thank you, Leora. Karina?
Um, I think that uh, the importance of understanding why citizenship is important and using that as a way to advocate and to live your life. I mean, I am oftentimes surrounded, and to Martine's point, our little corner of celebrity gossip of, with this administrative change and this slew of, well, I'm just going to live elsewhere. I want to move. Um, you know, um, I think that I believe that this country is amazing. I want to live here. I didn't choose to be here, but it chose me, and I'm proud to be here. And I'm proud to one day call myself an American. And I think that pride and patriotism can be wholesome and inclusive and living to the ideals of what this country was built on. And it has never been perfect. This country was not perfect under many different administrations, depending on who you ask, right? How people were affected by policy and change. What felt good in 1955 for an average, white family didn't feel the same way to an average black family. And that continues to exist today. I think that perfectionism doesn't exist. Perfectionism doesn't exist. We live in imperfection. But our Constitution is striving for perfect ideals. And we have the power. We have the opportunity to engage and have a relationship with the government and how we want to see the future. And I believe that our work as United Stateless, our name, our goal is to expand the American promise to include people that are stuck here through no fault of their own. They want to be here. We want to live here, and we want to be able to fully participate. And that's our pride. And I think that we should, Americans in the room, you should be proud to be an American and what that means. And we can create a better future for each other and ourselves. And I believe in that.
So eloquently put, both of you. Thank you so much. It's about expanding the American promise and being proud to be American, and knowing that a lot of these movements just require mobility, and they are fixable. Statelessness is fixable. It just requires all of us to be involved, right? Those with lived and learned experiences, and the rest of us to be involved through policy, through funding, just through advocacy, and we can actually move the needle forward. So I want to thank you both very, very much. I want to turn the tables over back to Shelby, who's going to field some questions from the audience. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh my God, what a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Leora and Karina and Martine. That was just enlightening. So thank you. We have a couple of minutes to answer a few questions, and I apologize in advance. We're not going to be able to get through all of them, but I actually want to start by Martine putting you in the hot seat for a minute. I would love to hear just a little bit more about your story and what the biggest challenges were for you as you were on your journey from statelessness to US citizenship.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I will keep it quick because I want to make sure that we get more questions from the audience. But I would say that, upon reflection, I feel like when I was stateless back in the early 2000s, this was right in the middle of 9/11. Perhaps policy was easier. I don't know. I mean, there wasn't a debate on birthright citizenship in the US. There wasn't, but things were still challenging. Long story short, I was born in Zambia. Zambia does not have birthright citizenship. My mother and father are from Democratic Republic of the Congo. I was not able to obtain citizenship through them and through the Congo because it also doesn't have birthright citizenship and was called Zaire when I came to the U.S. I grew up in the U.S. From since I was 4 years old, and I lost my mother and stepfather, who were my parents, by the time I was 15, and was navigating the world as an undocumented immigrant. And while I was in removal proceedings for the course of 7 years, I stumbled upon the fact that I was also stateless. And my reality was, whether I was going to go to a detention facility, and my fear was that it would be indefinite. because I knew that I didn't have any legal recourse. And also, there was discussion about a third country where they were going to send me. The judge that was presiding over my case was, I would say, and I use this term intentionally, was on a crusade to annihilate me, just get rid of me, do something, discard me. And so that was my reality for many years. And uh, because I had the right mental health practitioner, I found a really amazing therapist. It took a lot of, challenges in finding one. And I had an amazing attorney at that point. And then also had a community. I created my own little community because there wasn't a USL at that time that I knew of, and there wasn't a CVT at that time that I knew of. So these three, buckets were my mechanism to moving forward. And my case went to the Board of Immigration Appeals. I spoke I spoke on Congress, and my case eventually was appealed, and then I became a U.S. citizen. So the biggest challenge for me, Shelby, to answer your question, was just not knowing what was going to happen to me and feeling like I was holding my breath for all of these years, and the trauma that I experienced. So people don't always understand that statelessness is just one trauma, but there's all of this trauma that precedes statelessness. And I was navigating that and having to hold myself together while making sure I survived, and I had a home and food to eat, a place to sleep, and those types of things. So that was the biggest challenge for me.
Thank you
Okay.
for sharing that. I know our conversation today has focused largely on the US here, but I had a question asking if children born in refugee camps are considered stateless. And I thought this was a really important question because as we see with climate change and conflict and human rights atrocities, that displacement is just increasing year over year. I think we have over, 120 million people displaced globally, and we're going to see more people in refugee camps and more babies being born in refugee camps. And so to me, this means that this is a problem that's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. And so I'm wondering if you can provide a little bit of insight to this topic of outside the US. Are these people who are born in refugee camps considered stateless?
Yes and no. It's definitely case by case basis. It's um, to verify, let me put it this way, to establish if someone is stateless, it's comparing the current nationality laws of every country that that person has a connection to. For me, it was verifying my background. I'm Ukrainian and Armenian. And when I went through my own status determination procedure, right, to establish factually, is Karina stateless? Well, according to Armenian nationality laws, current Ukrainian nationality laws, and where she lives now, United States nationality laws, she is not considered a citizen. And that kind of like in-depth like research is what we do for our clients. And when we pass the Status Protection Act, is what the government will do. The government agency will do is verify the evidence. You don't become stateless when you just lose your passport, right? It's absolutely discriminatory and acute. And stateless people can be resettled as refugees in the United States. And the important part here is that there is a path to protection and a path to naturalization, which is important that we keep. And what's even more important is that there is education among resettled refugees who are stateless in this country of to naturalize and as soon as they can to not have that threat, especially because with administration changes comes policy changes. And we've seen this administration expand their enforcement priorities to also impact resettled refugees and those that are stateless that lose their refugee protection become our clients. They become those that don't have options. And that answers another question. How is someone from the Soviet Union, who is a Soviet citizen, a country that doesn't exist anymore, how can they obtain protection? Well, not solely based on their statelessness. Are there other facts and perspectives of their story that they can seek protection? Are they, for instance, do they have an opportunity because they're married to a US citizen or have a US citizen child? What are existing laws and protections that they can apply for? And that does not cover everybody. I think about 80% of our clients need Congress to pass the Stateless Protection Act to be able to seek protection and eventually become a stateless survivor.
And I think maybe the last thing that I'll really underscore from what Karina said, which can make this confusing but is worthwhile to name while we're together today, is that it's possible to have both of these things at the same time. And so it's possible to be a stateless person who is also an asylum seeker. It's possible to be a refugee or a green card holder who is also a stateless person, because statelessness is related to nationality and citizenship. And so we have, for example, at CVT worked with many Nicaraguan human rights defenders who came with their citizenship, filed for asylum, and then had their citizenship stripped. So they continue to be asylum seekers. Many will become asylees and may adjust through that process. But within that context, when the nationality is revoked and statelessness becomes a part of the story, the vulnerabilities increase, right? So it's not like putting things into a bucket and necessarily checking a box that says, well, if you're stateless, then you're not these other things. It is possible to hold multiple statuses or pursue multiple statuses at the same time. And the question is what does the reality of statelessness like kind of create for people as they are moving through systems that, as we know from many other CVT webinars like this, and through the work that we're all doing in this space, that just kind of the increasing worries and uncertainties that all of this creates in a very, very prolonged system, yeah, protracted system.
Thank you. I have one more question for our speakers, but I know we're over time and I apologize that. So if you have to hop off, we completely understand. But I just wanted to give our speakers all the opportunity to share how the folks on this call can help support individuals who are experiencing statelessness and how they can help support USL and CVT. So I'll let them respond to that and then we can wrap things up. So thank you for sticking around with us.
Quickly follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter. You will receive all those links after this we wrap up. But most importantly, realize the importance of nationality and citizenship, and that people that it's not equal as we want and strive to be, and the importance of realizing the sensitivities around statelessness, especially if you work with vulnerable populations. And thank you so much for joining us today and hearing what is our passion and what we are striving for.
I would say add to that, talk to your people, your family, your friends, your communities, share what you learned today. Because, this is still an issue that's not well understood. And being able to, especially to share those ways that this connects to each and every one of us who is here is so important in such a divided society. So continue this conversation after our time together today.
And I will add just one last thing, continued curiosity. So as you're watching in the news, the media around immigration policies and so forth, just ask the question, how does this relate back to statelessness? And then redirect yourself to USL and CVT's websites, and I'm sure there'll be some more information that will help to, explain and elaborate on things. So continued curiosity.
I love that. We should all have continued curiosity. Thank you once again, Karina, Martine, and Leora. This has just been an outstanding hour together. And I just want to thank you all for your time and your expertise and your insights. And I want to thank everybody on this call for taking time out of your day to join us for this really important conversation. I know we've shared a lot of resources. We've talked a lot about different stories and the Citizens of Nowhere film. I will be sharing links to all of this in a follow-up email that you'll get later today, along with the link to the recording of today's conversation, which you are welcome to share with others who are interested in learning more about statelessness and how it intersects with trauma healing. So thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you all very soon. Thank you, everyone.